it's almost a magical feeling when you kind of drag and drop just the floor plan into the tool, and the next thing you see, because this is like truly because substantial AI, the next thing you start to see is those heat maps. You can you can ask the computer to design the entire network for you. It'll do that, and you'll see heat maps and an optimized network. That's very recently happened that it can, because the AI can figure out the building characteristics. That's been the tedious thing for the network engineers, like indicate where all the walls are, where are the main walls, where are the elevators, and stuff like that. And that no longer needs to happen. And I think that's the very substantial thing.
How does it work all that stuff out? I mean, what information does it draw from?
Tons of training.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. My last one, not drinking any beer, not that I'm counting the days at all. And I'm delighted to say we got a special guest on this pod, come over from Finland.
Correct.
Jussi. I'm extending the S's because you got two S's. And
correct, yeah.
And I'm going to have a go at your surname, even though you told me not to bother.
That's very brave.
Because I can see the spelling. Kiviniemi.
You got it, man.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Well, I just hear you say it, so I guess I cheated a bit.
Kiviniemi. Still good.
Okay.
And you're from Hamina Wireless. Hamina Wireless.
Correct. That's correct.
And we've got in the background, we've got your colleague Mia. Hi, Mia. Who's just joined the team. So welcome. This is your baptism of fire, Mia.
Oh, God.
I think you've. Oh, well done, Ian.
Well, I didn't do that.
Ian just opened a beer, and it's. I don't know if you saw our Christmas one, you'll see, but
someone's booby trapped my
our
beer.
friend bought one of those hats where you put beer in the hat and then you drink it through a straw.
Of course.
But it wasn't the most sophisticated get-up, and Ian soiled himself while he was trying to use it. So now it's become endemic. So what are you doing there? Yussi's just unbidden, just cracked open a bottle of Bombay Sapphire. Why don't you tell us why you're pouring out slugs of gin for everyone?
Okay, yeah. So you know how Finland really has two exports, right? Nokia being one,
right,
and a thing called long drink, or lonkero as we call it, as the other. So back in we had Olympics in '52, and they needed besides beer, they needed a fast to pour drink.
Right.
So they came up with mixing gin and grapefruit juice and carbonizing it.
I was about to say, you don't typically pull gin out of like taps.
Yeah, exactly. But
then again, I wouldn't put it past you Finns.
Yeah. I mean, we are professionals at telecom and heavy drinking. That's our forte. Just like
that's the same as
I
us.
believe me, there's no moral aspect to my statement there. If anything, it's admiration.
Absolutely.
So you got this long drink, which is gin and grapefruit, but it's not actually that alcoholic. When you said it first, I thought, damn, are these people drinking pints of like 20% or something like that?
We do that too, but that's not this drink. So this is 5.5 is typically 5.5.
So it's quite diluted, like with soda water or whatever.
Yeah, exactly right.
And so you brought some San Pellegrino, although for some reason they only had it in Italian. And you intended to get grapefruit, but you've ended up with some lemon and mint and some straight up lemon as well.
Won't it?
Yeah,
he's doing the one grapefruit one he got.
It's not like Ray Dolan's Cuba Libras, is it?
No. He's done it about half and half, I think.
Yeah.
We had a guy come on in December, and he wanted to make us Cuba Libres. I think his wife's Cuban or something like that. And he just did these half and half ones. So we're drinking about this big, but it was about up to there with rum.
Jeez.
And then we had that. And then the week after that, no, it's the same week. A geezer brought this stuff, this brimstone scrub oak smoked, which is 53% alcohol.
Okay.
So it's not just you Finns to drink
so it
the hard
seems.
stuff.
Taste test.
So it's better with just the gin and grapefruit juice. I tried putting
that and
meat stuff. Yeah, messes with it.
So you poured one for.
Who's up for?
If there's one there, then
yeah, go for it.
My dry January's become.
And I'm being good still.
You're
being good, but you got one for me. Haven't you?
Yeah. There we go.
Yeah, this is.
Cheers.
Cheers.
What do you say in Finnish?
Hölökyn kölökyn.
Okay, what he said.
Cheers.
Now repeat that.
Cheers. I'll clink you. Cheers, Mia.
Yeah, cheers.
I'm clinking, and thank you for buying me this Beck's blue. It's got to be better than that Heineken that you bought me. No, I mean, I hate to sound ungrateful, but it wasn't great. Let's give it the old taste test.
Holocan.
Got it, man.
Holocan.
That's very impressive.
Is that like Skoll?
Yeah.
But you had to go and make it about 40 syllables.
Yeah, it's what we do.
Overcomplicated.
There is actually kippis, which sounds like you can learn. The thing is, just say get pissed really quickly. Kippis. Kippis.
Yeah, that one I can remember. Yeah. Can you imagine? That would be a great one. Instead of cheers, just get pissed. So yeah, there we are. So yeah, again, perhaps not coincidence with their, in my case, not drinking, but it's probably just a January thing in general. Hasn't been much going on, I say. There's not much opening bollocks to talk about. I haven't really left the house since the pod last week.
There's not been many work outings, no.
No, I mean, I'm not going to talk about walking the dog or going to Sainsbury's or something.
Okay.
So yeah, and Pierre starts to panic when we go off on initial tangents.
I mean, I think things are starting to heat up a bit, aren't they, from next week?
Yeah. Is next week the Ericsson thing? Or is that the week after? Oh, no, that's into February, isn't it? Okay.
Yeah.
I've lost track of time.
If you're talking about their pre-MWC briefing.
Yeah. But we'll obviously, main segment, we'll talk about Jussi's and Hamina's area of business, which we'll get onto in a sec. But then we're also going to talk about, Ian and I were both writing up Ericsson's quarterlies this morning. I haven't read yours yet, mate, so I don't no idea what angle you took. But we'll talk about that.
Probably the same one as you.
Well, it's off on the way, isn't it?
Yeah. We've been advised to look for different angles.
Well, I know. I used our little Teams group to say what I was doing.
I mean, I find this going to be hard to enforce with things like the Ericsson results when you're trying to get something done very quickly and then come in. But there's another time for this conversation. Probably.
Yeah, well, perhaps later on in this pod. Let's see. Is yours up yet?
Yeah, there we are. It's not in the window.
No, okay.
But it is up.
Oh no, you've gone for a job angle which I didn't go for, so we're good. That's differentiated enough.
Okay.
But we both reflected on how increasingly dependent they are on the Yanks.
Increasingly dependent on the Yanks and increasingly dependent on efficiency measures, I think, for profit growth.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, well, let's not steal our own thunder there. And then I think we might just talk, if we've got time at the end, about this new mega AI thing that's announced in the States. So we've had Trump come in, and they've got this thing now. They've only been doing it for about the last 20 or 30 years. They used to have a normal sort of parliamentary thing where if you wanted a law, it had to go through Congress and they'd argue the toss and there'd be horse trading and eventually it'd become a law. Now the president just comes in and just starts whizzing off these executive orders. And it's become more and more like a sort of ephemeral dictatorship. Signing
pardons, and they sign pardons as they go out, and they sign pardons as they come in, and they're all
Biden just pardons dodgy. Everyone, anyone.
Well, they're all very dubious. All the pardons, to be honest,
pretty much,
been issued. I mean, whatever you think of I know it was characterised as an insurrection and it was a riot, but it's a lot of violence, and these guys are just now, it's like they didn't do anything.
And then meanwhile, Biden's pardoned anyone whose surname is Biden.
Yes.
If only my surname was Biden, then I could go on a crime spree. So anyway, but we're going to talk about that because another of his big announcements is this big AI infrastructure thing in partnership with OpenAI and a few other people. But there's all sorts of hyperbolic claims thrown around it, which is so unlike anything associated with Trump, isn't it? And I think I want to sort of examine that. And yeah, it's just interesting, and obviously AI being a big overall theme. But before we get into all that
there is
stuff,
a telecom angle to it as well.
Cool. Yeah. Well, that's good to know.
And there's an obvious one and a less obvious one.
Right. Well, I can't wait to hear them both, mate. But let's get back to you, Jussi. I'm doing the extended S. We don't really have that, do we, in English? We don't say anything with an extended S. Why don't we take it from the top? Because until I heard from you, and I can't remember what the context was. Did you just ping me on LinkedIn or an email or something?
I did. So your listener pinged me and said you should go on Telecoms.com.
Yeah, well, that's always nice to know, isn't it? That there's the sort of little network of people talking about the pod and recommending people. That's it. So someone recommended to you, and then you went, "What do you reckon?" And I went, "Yeah, let's do it." That's about as sort of thorough as the conversation generally is. But I wasn't very familiar with your company beforehand, so why don't we just take it from the top? Why don't you tell us who you are, what you do, what it's all about?
Yeah, I think it's kind of the reason of existence for what we do is like I think we've all come across bad wireless connectivity all the time, and we talked about that, like on our way to this room. In fact,
yeah. Well, like we don't get the cellular doesn't penetrate this building.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So Wi-Fi to the rescue. But once you start building Wi-Fi bigger than your home, it actually starts interfering with itself, and you start to see coverage gaps, interference, all of that kind of stuff. So any larger than home Wi-Fi, if you want it to work well, it has to be designed well. I'm sure we've all been at airports, hotels, suffering from terrible Wi-Fi, stuff like that. So
conferences too, actually.
Oh
yeah, it's Telecoms conferences, especially
Telecoms conferences.
Yes,
they're pretty bad at it.
And we were at the unnamed conference. Which was huge here in London as well. We just came from there, and during peak hours, not great.
Okay.
So we make tools for the people who design, deploy, and troubleshoot wireless networks to do it more effectively. And kind of like if you look at, you guys play more in the mobile networking space, and if you look at like very wide area like networks. It's dedicated almost like RF radio frequency rocket scientists designing them at the basement of AT&T, and they've done it for 30 years, and they use tools that cost $100,000 and they're complex to use.
It's licensed spectrum.
Exactly, and only a handful of people know how to operate them. But our tools is like already 3.5 years in, like thousands of people in 80 countries buy our tools, and they use it for designing, deploying not just better Wi-Fi, but better private 5G or better wireless IoT networks, or often the problem might be actually in switching and cabling. So we take a look at a little bit of that.
So it's interesting that you're in that space, because it seems like a no-brainer that there would be demand for what you do.
Yes, sir.
Because everyone's experienced substandard, frustrating. Hold on, I've got a tickle in my throat. Sort of wireless, whether it's through Wi-Fi or cellular or some combination. And actually the switching between the two is another pain point.
Absolutely.
So it's interesting. And how long's your company been going?
Just 3.5 years. Okay. So not very long.
Right. And what was the background? Were you the founder?
Yeah, I'm the founder. So actually, our previous company did the same thing, but more legacy, more hard to use, that kind of stuff, and sold that. That company was sold. The core team we went our separate ways. I went to this AI Wi-Fi company called Mist, acquired by Juniper, acquired now by HPE. So then a couple of years later we reunited because we couldn't figure out anything more grandiose to do, like saving the world kind of a thing, where we're like, okay, let's do the same thing again, but with modern technology stack, not just Wi-Fi, but private 5G, IoT, everything, and infuse a little bit of AI in there, not just for marketing purposes, but buzzword. Did you have the buzzword card already out?
AI is a buzzword that transcends this podcast, that's for sure. But I think it's incumbent on anyone, and I'll challenge you to do it now, incumbent on anyone who drops the AI term to say, why is it more than just sort of AI spam in this case? So why don't you substantiate it? What's the AI element in what you do?
Excellent question. So a simple example, and without spilling too many beans, is when you design an indoor network, there's a couple of things that are important. In addition to taking a picture of the fire escape plan of this office, you can use that as a reference, but you need a metric scale of the drawing. AI can actually figure that out better than a human. Secondly, the walls. AI can take a look at the picture and say the walls are actually here and start to trace those, so we understand the attenuation of the signals. And AI can figure out a starting point for you on we think these are the areas that are of interest to you because we've trained it with tens of thousands of this kind of projects. So that's where
so there's a bit of specific training,
image recognition, and then when you start to look at millions and millions of packets coming through the network and pinpoint a problem, AI is really good at this needle in a haystack. You take a packet, what's called a packet capture, and give it to an AI, and it will give you an answer. So
Just to be clear, the tools that you have are really sort of figuring out how to configure and how to map it to the environment that you're in the most efficient way.
Yeah. It's about how many devices to buy, what kind, what model, what make and model of devices, and what kind of switching do I need, how much cabling do I need, how many cable runs, how are the cables going through the floors, everything like that.
Would you use it just when you're sort of installing, and then it's kind of, it's done its job then, or does it kind of carry on running and provide sort of updates if the environment changes?
Excellent question, and every venture capitalist we talk to asks that same question because
recurring revenue.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So yes, it does the whole cycle in Wi-Fi and I would say private 5G as well. It's 3 stages. It's the planning of the network, so you figure out by simulation where to place the radios.
Yeah.
Then you deploy the network and you validate it. So it's kind of like in cellular, you do the drive testing. In Wi-Fi, it's called a Wi-Fi site survey. So you walk around the building and you kind of map it out. And the end result is heat maps, essentially, showing coverage, interference, all of that. But then the ongoing network, and this is, since you guys are all about Open RAN, and this
especially
is kind
of... He's obsessed with it.
Yeah, he's not so much about Open RAN.
So kind of similar, we're obsessed about API-driven enterprise network. So essentially every Cisco, Juniper, whatever enterprise network you put in, a lot of them run on the cloud today. They're cloud managed. The data doesn't go through their cloud, but it's cloud managed network. So we can actually tap into the APIs, pull all the information about any network is essentially that's cloud driven, and we can pinpoint like a visual footprint of where is Scott now, for example, how is his device doing? We can start pinging and testing against your device just using the infrastructure for troubleshooting and visualization and this kind of stuff.
So is that the kind of APIs that we always hear Ericsson going on about with their strategy?
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that even though you're Finnish, you're not nationally biased in favour of one big vendor over another.
Definitely not. We partner with every single one of them. Yeah.
So that's another good one, because we hear, and we'll probably talk about this later when we talk about Ericsson's quarterlies. We hear a lot of theoretical stuff about network APIs and how that's the next big opportunity. But it's been a really slow burner, and I don't often encounter many tangible examples of how it's useful. So it's good to hear that that's one.
It's definitely real here.
Yeah.
So visualizing the current network is one thing, but the other one would be automatic deployment of network. So you can do figure out the placements of the radios and blah, blah, blah. And we can click a button in our tool and it commissions the entire, let's say, Cisco or Juniper network with a click of a button using the APIs. So people don't need to touch their dashboard. They can deploy it automatically from our system.
So it'll work with any kind of equipment that has been, whether it's Cisco or Juniper, the ones you mentioned. It doesn't really matter.
Nokia, Ericsson, whatever you know.
Right.
And who are your customers? I mean, is it people who build and run buildings, or is it these SIs who want to make their stuff better, or what?
It's all of the above, but really 2 main groups, right? Network, what we call network owners. So they would be IT staff in any company. If they have any responsibility over their network, sometimes it's outsourced, sometimes not. So if it's insourced, at least to some degree, then it's the network administrators, it's the IT administrators. The second one is MSPs, systems integrators, that kind of stuff. People who design, deploy, and troubleshoot networks for other companies. So those would be your big US telecom operators, big Scandinavians, big UK ones.
It sounds like you got up and running pretty quickly, because some companies, the startups that are 3 years old are often still at the stage of developing the technology and raising capital, whereas it sounds like you've got quite a lot of business already going.
Yeah, that's a good question.
What's your headcount, sorry?
Headcount is 40. Okay.
That's not bad for 3 years.
Yeah, and we've been really
41 including me.
That's right. 40 people, but I think the traction is also about we have paying customers in probably 80 countries, thousands of them. So even though it's a niche industry, and it's purely product-led growth until now. So we have one salesperson, for example.
Right. And did you raise funding, private equity funding when you started?
We did. We have raised total roughly 10 million of private equity. I mean, all I know, well, outside of Mia, but all I know in terms of engineers, they're like 40, 50-year-old dads. So you need to pay them money. Like we like this is not like a 20-year-old guy like kind of grinding startup. We need to pay them decent salaries so that they can feed their families from the start. So there was no question for me. Like I couldn't bootstrap it. I put in my own money in the very beginning as well, but I could never have like self-funded the whole thing.
You got to pay proper geeks.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you see like other companies? I mean, you mentioned you were at Mist before.
Yeah.
Would they have tools that do similar things, or is this quite different from what a Cisco or a Juniper? Well, it's going to be HPE, I suppose, soon, isn't it? Although that acquisition seems to be taking forever.
It's not closed, is it?
That.
But I don't. That's a good question to ask them because I don't know what's going on there. But would they have?
Probably
would
Europe
they
getting
have
in the way.
internal tools that do some of this stuff? Or it sounds like there's obviously a gap that you've been able to find to sell a lot of products to customers in 80 countries, but yeah.
Excellent question. So I think it's the US holding up. Actually the deal. But to come back to your
revealing my bias against the EU there.
Yeah. So they we actually call these guys vendors. So the network infrastructure manufacturers like Cisco, Juniper, all of these guys. They luckily for us and the reason for our existence is they're very busy building access points, security, network access control. AI infused things that are directly related to the infrastructure, the core dashboards configuration. So that leaves us the visualization, making things visual, easy to use, real time, this kind of stuff. So think of us as an additional layer on top of theirs. Every now and then, one of the vendors starts doing a little bit of visualization, but then it gets pushed back. The manager goes into another role. The project gets scrapped. So we do see those vendor-specific tools come and go every now and then, but they never stick. That's what's happened at least so far in the industry. They come and go.
Well, so I suppose the beauty of what you're doing is it gets to that sort of horizontal layering stuff that Ericsson goes on a lot about at the moment, where you can put something across multiple different infrastructure
exactly
networks.
Exactly right. And often like if it's a large company, they might have a dual vendor strategy for let's say Wi-Fi alone, let alone private 5G. Switching might be a different vendor. So definitely like vendor neutralness is a key for SIs, MSPs, and for most of the network owners.
So you were showing me. We can't really show it on a pod that people mainly listen to and don't really watch, and it probably wouldn't work on the camera. But you were showing me on the laptop before we started, when Scott was out of the room, the kind of visualization of a building internally with like a sort of heat map almost.
Yep,
this is what people would see presumably when they start using it, and they can figure out from that where the kind of black spots are, or white spots, whatever we call them now.
Absolutely, so it's almost a magical feeling when you kind of drag and drop just the floor plan into the tool, and the next thing you see, because this is like truly because substantial AI, the next thing you start to see is those heat maps. You can you can ask the computer to design the entire network for you. It'll do that, and you'll see heat maps and an optimized network. That's very recently happened that it can, because the AI can figure out the building characteristics. That's been the tedious thing for the network engineers, like indicate where all the walls are, where are the main walls, where are the elevators, and stuff like that. And that no longer needs to happen. And I think that's the very substantial thing.
How does it work all that stuff out? What information does it draw from?
Tons of training data. So it's a traditional convolutional neural network, like really traditional machine learning system. You give it so much. We actually employ 5 people who just annotate. They just annotate the AI drawing for us. For example, they start doing things on top of a floor plan, and we train the AI using that.
And each time you had a bit of business in a new building or a new environment, you would then specially train the AI around that environment, would you?
Actually, we don't even use, for example, customers' wall data, because the customers may have done the walls sloppily. So we actually use the annotators to do like really professional wall data. I shouldn't give up too many of our secrets, but that's one of the one of the things. And this is very normal.
Next week we'll have a sudden competitor of yours on the podcast.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
But are there, competitors? Obviously you were saying it's quite different from what a Juniper or a Cisco would do, but do you see anybody else kind of doing a similar thing? Great question. Our core team, actually, we built the previous
thing as well, which became
the
global industry standard. So we're kind of fighting against our own.
Competing with the legacy.
Yes, sir.
Right.
But at least you know what they've done and where they've been and how they came about.
I've been completely lobotomized after that.
Of course.
But yeah. I mean,
you're trying to suggest, Ian.
You were saying it's sort of moving a bit, I think, before we started into the private 5G space as well.
Yeah,
so is that the same kind of principle, basically, that you would, in the case of private 5G, I guess we're talking more about licensed spectrum there, and but the idea is the same. It's the same kind of system that you would use.
Absolutely. It's identical system used. Just instead of Wi-Fi access points, you place 5G eNode Bs, GNode Bs, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And it's licensed and lightly licensed in the case of US, like 3.5. CBRS 3.5.
How quickly is that growing? Because we've always got. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about private 5G for a long time, and there's a bit of a Wi-Fi private 5G rivalry, I guess, to some extent. And obviously, the guys in the 5G camp are saying, well, it has certain features that you don't have with Wi-Fi, and then you hear the reply. But how quickly is the private 5G market kind of developing from what you've seen, I guess?
Another really good question. I think from the start, we started 2021. And that was still kind of a little bit on the tail end of the hype curve of private 5G, you could say. So we were like, this has to be private 5G from the get-go, as well as Wi-Fi. It seemed really strong. But I think already at that time, a lot of us were puzzling, what's the use case and what's the justification for the increased cost and stuff like that. Yeah. Now what we're seeing is the hype that, a lot of the industry said it's going to kill Wi-Fi and it's going to become the new enterprise wireless thing. Well, if it's a lot more expensive and harder to deploy, it's not going to go to every enterprise and replace Wi-Fi. What we're seeing is in certain environments, Wi-Fi is almost always deployed almost everywhere, right? And then on top of that, in certain environments like factories, warehouses, military, airports, these kind of verticals, we're seeing a lot of private 5G.
You do have advantages when it comes to things like security,
exactly,
guaranteed bandwidth, quality of service, that sort of thing.
Do you? I'm interested in that because that's the pitch.
That's my assumption, actually. I'll let you see. But that
tends to be the pitch that's made, I guess, is that you get security, you get things like network slicing. There's a big deal made of that. But I'm always curious that can you not do those things on Wi-Fi networks or I mean, things like Wi-Fi 7. Is it we're up to now? Is it Wi-Fi 7?
It is.
It is Wi-Fi 7, and you can ask Telecoms realist Dean Bubley also about slicing and other things.
He's
our common friend, right?
He's coming on in about a month.
Excellent, hey Dean.
In fact, we'll come back to that because he'd obviously met you and heard that you were coming on the pod, and I said, what should we ask him? And he sent me some suggestions, so we might draw on them in a bit.
Excellent,
but carry on,
excellent.
as you were saying.
Yeah. So, okay, how did we get to Dean? I'm trying to.
I was just sort of wondering whether some of the
claims made about
the claims 5G. Of 5G, can you not do it on Wi-Fi?
So that's a really, really good question. I think there's there's a big argument to be made about clean spectrum, right, and dedicated spectrum. Now, who's going to guarantee that those packets get delivered? That's a tougher question to me, but it definitely has a really, really, really high chance of the packets going through if you have dedicated spectrum. Now, in the US, it's more lightly licensed, CBRS, for example, but it's still controlled. So that's definitely going for it. I think Wi-Fi 7, Wi-Fi 6E, like WPA3, you can design an incredibly secure Wi-Fi network. So I think the security is more like I don't know if there's much substance against modern Wi-Fi security there.
Right.
It can be also coverage. So for example, if you pick very low frequency private 5G and deploy that in a harbor or a container yard, it's so much superior compared to Wi-Fi, which is fairly high frequency.
So that would be sub 1 gigahertz.
Yeah, it could be 450.
I heard HPE making a case for this, I think, because they have both in their portfolio now, obviously.
Yeah,
I guess that's going to get bigger anyway with the Juniper takeover. But they were very much saying, in answer to sort of questions from analysts on a call I was on ages ago, that one of the main differentiators is to do with that. If you're trying to build a harbour, kind of local network,
Exactly.
Private 5G is the way to do it, not Wi-Fi, because of the spectrum.
Or if you want to automate critical things on your factory line or warehouse, you may want to consider, private 5G dedicated spectrum. And like one of my friends in one of the biggest retail chains in the world said that we will use every spectrum you give us. Like they use so much automation that they just have to use everything at their disposal. But now at the risk of ranting for a longer time about this, but I think
rant away, man.
Right, I'll rant away. So I think what people are missing is, and this is where maybe us as a Wi-Fi industry we could do a better job at shouting this out. But the 6 gigahertz band for Wi-Fi, which has been recently opened up. I don't know, some of the listeners are more telecom heavy. So Wi-Fi for 20 years, it used to operate on two bands, 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. And now there's a new band on the 6 gigahertz spectrum, both in the US, that's 1250, like more than a gigahertz of bandwidth, an enormous number. In Europe, it's 500, and we're trying to get more. But that's it's clean spectrum. There's so much of it, that incredible bandwidths, clean spectrum, low latency, not guaranteed packet delivery. But if you deploy something well, and this is where it kind of often fails, like people don't think about the deployment, they don't design properly and stuff like that. But if you deploy 6 gigahertz capable Wi-Fi well, if you make a sound design, it's incredibly low latency, high probability of getting the packets through, and it's just an astronomical amount of bandwidth. So that's what people are not talking about. And this is
that the 6 gigahertz?
This is the 6 gigahertz. And
I was going to ask you about that because there was a bit of a tussle about a year ago with Wi-Fi sort of stakeholders, because I think what they call it, is it IMT, and they have some big get together called WRC, and there was one called WRC 23, which is presumably the year. And the big agenda, ITU, sorry. Mm-hmm. And the big agenda going into that was how they're going to divide 6 gigahertz band between people who want it for Wi-Fi and people who want it for cellular.
Yep.
How did that go? Did that resolve itself in a good way, do you think?
I think since there isn't so much money in Wi-Fi, given the amount of money in Wi-Fi and the amount of resources, the Wi-Fi lobbyists did a fantastic job. You should actually talk to Chuck Lukaszewski about this.
Okay.
He used to be the mobility CTO for HPE Aruba, and he was one of the lobbyists for Wi-Fi. He went around the world and lobbied 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi. So he's one of the reasons
He's not at Aruba anymore, is he?
That's right. He's not. He's more like racing his Porsche Cayman more these days than
So he's done all right then.
Yeah, he did all right, and for a good reason. He's a fantastic
cool.
person.
But the decision. Sorry. Yeah.
No, I was just the 6 gigahertz frequency. Do you need more nodes then?
That's a great question. And like us, because we do the heat mapping for different frequencies and stuff like that. So actually, that was a big hot potato a few years ago. Like, how is it going to play out? But it turns out 6 gigahertz is often actually deployed like a little bit higher transmit power than 5 gigahertz where and when allowed. So then the cell sizes are pretty much identical between 5 and 6. And if you look at the upper part of 5 and lower part of 6 gigahertz frequency space, they almost touch one another anyway. So they're really, really close.
So that's interesting, because my assumption always, in a very sort of simplified way, was the higher frequency, the poorer the propagation characteristics. And I assumed it was pretty much a linear thing.
Almost, yeah. It is in free space, yes.
In free space, yeah. But then what you just described, which I hadn't necessarily factored in, is the power. Mm-hmm. And you can compensate, you can improve the propagation characteristics of the power, but then there's lots of regulation around that.
Absolutely.
Because people start freaking out about getting their brains cooked and shit like that.
Doesn't Wi-Fi 7, is it MLO when they mix all three at once?
Yeah. So and that's another good point. So the biggest thing to me about Wi-Fi 7 is Wi-Fi 6E, but nobody has ever heard of Wi-Fi 6E. But Wi-Fi 6E is where actually E stands for essentially the 6 gigahertz band. So 6 gigahertz came out already on Wi-Fi 6E, but 7 is where it comes to mature. 7 is a new number that people understand. So
it's one better, isn't it?
It is one better, just like 6G or 7G or 8G. But to answer your question about MLO or multi-link operation, yes, there is there's every Wi-Fi iteration brings new other mechanisms as well. And in Wi-Fi 7, one of them is multi-link operation, where you can use, like, for example, a Wi-Fi AP always, or a Wi-Fi access point always has, like, let's say a Wi-Fi 7 AP could, in the enterprise, have 3 radios, one for 2.4, one for 5, and one for 6 gigahertz. So it's all built in there, and they're all operating at the same time. But your client device, your phone, before Wi-Fi 7, it's been on one of those only. It's associated to one of the radios. But MLO essentially means that you might get more robustness or more throughput, depending on the MLO operation mode, by utilizing a couple of the bands at the same time. Also, like, that means the client device needs to be capable of doing that and all of that. But the true benefits of all these kind of technologies is, like, you just need to see that out in the field and measure. One thing is how well it works in the labs, but we're pushing the envelope in so many things on kind of getting the bits per second higher, that my opinion is, unless you get new significant amounts of new spectrum or some radical innovation, then the benefits may be more marginal than humongous. So again, the big thing about Wi-Fi 7 thus, to me, is 6 gigahertz still. Like, that's the massive thing that people haven't utilized, people aren't talking about enough.
Well, just to quickly finish off, and then I'll defer to you. Is the big deal about 6 gigahertz then that there's lots of it?
Yes.
Yeah. Because, I mean, that's really... I mean, I'm sure most listeners to this will probably know this, but, you know, the only reason we're really talking about higher frequencies, given that they have inferior propagation characteristics, is because there's more of it. And we can do this massive MIMO and basically have a fatter pipe. Sorry, Dean, he hates that analogy. But basically have a fatter pipe.
Yep.
And you're saying that 6, there's a big tranche of spectrum.
There's a huge chunk of spectrum, and there's another thing. I'll let you go. Sorry, Pierre, in a second. But the other thing is it's very, very clean in the 6 gigahertz spectrum. 2.4 is completely like
right. Use the 6 gigahertz. It's sort of empty. Or?
There's almost nobody there. There is incumbents there. Like, for example, in the States, like, there is some gotchas. You cannot use 6 gigahertz outdoors in Europe yet at all. And in the US, it's very controlled outdoors because there is point-to-point links and things like that are on the same frequency. But it's, you could say, compared to 2.4 and 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi spaces, 6 gigahertz is empty.
But that point-to-point stuff's quite legacy, isn't it?
It is. It is.
I mean, that must be getting phased out. You would have thought.
That's not like microwave connections between base stations. You're not talking about that stuff.
That kind of stuff.
Oh, that sort of stuff.
Well,
you say that's legacy. Yeah. Is that being phased out as a thing that they do?
I think there's just more efficient technologies now.
Oh, okay, right, okay. Yeah. I didn't even know that.
No, I learned all of this, by the way, setting up Wi-Fi 7 at my own house. So
excellent.
I Googled it and learned a bit. Because you were talking about node to device, but I've also saw that it's also between nodes. So, like, if you send in 6 gigahertz to the first child node, let's say, then that child node can send potentially 2.4 to devices that are further away, and it'll have more bandwidth thanks to this. Does that make sense? Sorry.
Absolutely, and so mesh Wi-Fi,
mesh Wi-Fi,
and mesh Wi-Fi at homes, I tend to have I apologize, I tend to have an enterprise angle, so that's why I didn't bring it up. But it's great for mesh. You can dedicate one of the radios for meshing the link between two meshing APs. It's not utilized in enterprises, but at homes it can be a great way to extend your Wi-Fi. Because previously we only had 2.4 and 5, and 2.4 kind of already pretty crowded. You don't want to use that as a meshing or access technology only. So that leaves you with 5 gigahertz, and you kind of wanted to use that for both meshing and client device access. So now we can use 5 for meshing, 6 gigahertz for access, or probably vice versa. So
and you can use MLO between the nodes as well.
There is those the things that make it even faster.
Just on that 6 gigahertz decision that Scott was going on about, the ITU one, and you were saying the Aruba guy was kind of a lobbyist.
Yeah.
But I kind of lost sight. I mean, shows I should be better at my job, really, keeping sight of these things. But I kind of lost sight of how that all resolved in the end. I know the operators were pushing, the cellular community was pushing quite heavily to have, I think, the upper part, wasn't it, of the 6 gigahertz band. But did people come away from that feeling fairly happy in the Wi-Fi community, or was there a sense that cellular got more than it should have received, really? Because the interesting thing is, like you were saying, there's not as much money on the Wi-Fi side, but there's also a lot more usage on the Wi-Fi side, isn't there? Whereas, this is where everybody uses internet services, is on Wi-Fi. It's not really on 5G.
Yep, absolutely. So, were the Wi-Fi community happy? Depends on who you ask, but I think for the most part, people would really like to open up the upper part of 6 gigahertz band also for Wi-Fi in Europe and a few other places. So that's kind of the struggle that's still ongoing.
That's still going, okay.
But so in the US, it's 1250, like it's more than a gigahertz for Wi-Fi, which is like amazingly good.
I was just looking at a story we'd written on that not long after. No, actually, this was a year later. This was only last December. I wrote it, but it's a terrible thing. I was telling
Was that your breaking news story?
No, it's just you write something. It's the curse of being a journalist. You write something and then you move on to the next thing and you just sort of pretty much forget what you did. But I wrote this. Is about the US. The headline is a bit of a long headline. FCC decides unlicensed very low power devices can coexist with mobile and 6 gigahertz band. So this was a thing, and the 6 gigahertz band, as Jussi was just saying, is actually. I mean, in my writing, I put there's 1.2 gigs of it, but you said there's even a little bit more than that.
Oh, was it 1.2? You may be right.
Okay, well,
1200 or 1250.
Yeah, something like we're in the same ballpark. So it goes to either side of anything with a 6 in it. It starts at 5.925 and goes all the way to 7.125, according to my reporting, anyway. And and they've decided. So the interesting thing there is the coexistence. So you were talking about it being a sort of relatively uncongested or cluttered, but they reckon very low power devices, and by that this means more sort of like Bluetooth kind of range, I think. Things that are just feet away from each other is what they were referring
This would be probably mobile hotspots, for example.
But I think they were also talking about like wireless, like health monitoring devices and that sort of thing. Yeah. Anyway, the Yanks decided that they could all coexist with cellular in that area, and so that's an interesting thing. And I guess again that's where AI and stuff might come in handy for marshalling the coexistence of different services in the same area. Is that true?
So there is a system for the outdoor coexistence. Actually, a similar system exists for the CBRS 3.5 gigahertz private cellular band in the States called SAS, Spectrum Allocation Service, something like that. And in Wi-Fi, it's called AFC, Automatic Frequency Coordination. So in short, it means like there is a US and now Canada-wide map of all the point-to-point links and you know exactly in 3D from where to where and the beams and everything. And then the system, it's essentially multiple providers like Google as well as Wi-Fi Alliance provide these as a database. And then when the access point fires up, it's an outdoor access point placed outdoors in the 6 gigahertz space. It has to query the database to ask for the access point has to say, I am physically here. These are my geo coordinates. Now give me the allowed output powers for all of the 6 gigahertz channels, and then it has to abide.
A picture of a blockchain application there as well.
There you go. You go. And in our case, for example, our tool can globally ask also the system like, okay, for the designer, tell like, okay, this is how much capacity you have in these areas if you place the radios where you're thinking you're placing them and things like that. So yeah. AFC, Automatic Frequency Coordination, is the system.
Not to be confused with Arsenal Football Club.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Is there, with just going back to the private 5G side of things that you're going into, but does that offer an opportunity that you've not had before, perhaps, to go in to the telco side of things a bit more, where those companies are involved in it? And I know there's lots of different types of private 5G. There's all sorts of different variations of it. There's some where spectrum's been given directly to organisations like in Germany and a few other countries, and there's ones where the operators are quite heavily involved in supporting it. But is it a route for you to go in to telcos and maybe even do something in the public 5G space in an indoor environment? Yeah,
absolutely, and even maybe outdoor in the future as well.
Right.
But yeah, so there's multiple angles to this. But I'll start by saying that telcos actually are humongous MSPs as well for Wi-Fi. So a lot of the telcos that we have as customers use both Wi-Fi and private 5G. But it typically starts, in our case, because we have Wi-Fi legacy, it starts with Wi-Fi. But yes, it does open more telco angles, but also the story of supporting multiple technologies, like all factories, warehousing, airport stuff like that. They need to do it anyway, and if they use just one tool for it, there's obvious benefits: cost, complexity, deployment time, all of that. You only design, let's say, when it was still more manual, the environment, like walls and things like that, you only define the walls of the building and stuff like that once, and then you can deploy your IoT wireless using that. You can deploy your Wi-Fi, your private 5G, even your switching and cabling. So you don't need to use 3 different tools and start from scratch with each tool every time. So definitely there's benefits to it for us from marketing angle, approaching telecoms, but also the major car manufacturers, warehousing, like all of that.
And could you use it to sort of like compare the different
Absolutely.
technologies? You can, and sort of see which might be the most efficient and the most appropriate in a particular environment.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, the outdoor stuff on 5G sounds really interesting because I imagine, there's a lot of complaints at the moment. It's quite political, I guess, but about cities like, in fact, even we're going to talk about Ericsson later, but Boyeka moaned about London being rubbish for 5G on the earnings call this morning.
Yeah.
And there's all this stuff about Europe falling behind in 5G deployment.
Do we agree?
Well, it isn't very good, is it? I've always thought it's like an indoor thing, but I guess there's lots of street furniture and there's buildings in the way. But could your technology help with working out a better way to build 5G in a way? I mean, on a really kind of bigger scale, a kind of macro scale? Or is that something that's very much to do with what the operators are doing on
No, but that would go into our roadmap territory. So today we call ours conservatively like campus, like enterprise indoor and campus-sized outdoor. So I did model the FIRA area, for example, of Barcelona for MWC last year, but that was like 5 times 5 kilometers or 3 times 3 kilometers. That kind of stuff we already do handle, and ports and airport exterior areas, things like that. Stadiums definitely, but we haven't taken the like citywide or countrywide angle yet. But I hope IB Wave and Forsk and the other guys are not listening. But yeah, it's definitely on our global world domination plan.
I'm actually curious how that's managed. You've got something like Mobile World Congress where you've got an incredibly intense footfall in an area. It's sort of airport level of footfall that you get in the FIRA. And presumably you can't just stick up a couple of regular sort of domestic routers and hope that's going to do it. And I presume this is a whole specific area of technology, and there are sort of super powered routers. But could you just give me?
No.
You what?
We know the company
who's
we're not going to mention it.
Right. Okay, aren't we?
It's a big one.
It's a big one, like Cisco or something. Yeah. We are going to mention them.
I don't know if they do the entire FIRA.
No, but there will be others as well.
Yeah.
It's like the BBC always has to clear its throat and say other vendors are available.
Yeah.
But no, I'm just wondering about the science and the mechanics of it. How do you make that work if you've got one node, one, for want of a better word, router, and potentially hundreds of people can be trying to access the internet from it? Is there some sort of special science there, or is it just a normal router on steroids?
There is science in a couple of ways. One part is like, the proper design, and kind of you can pretty easily predict the footfall and to which, how many people will be on which radios and stuff like that. Radio overload is what happens there. So too many client devices associated to all of the 2.4, 5 and 6 gigahertz radios. But since we understand how iPhones work, how laptops work, how they tend to associate, where the people will be congregated, our tool models all of that automatically for you to prevent cases like radio overload and all of that. So that's from my tool vendor salesy perspective. But there's also, of course, there's massive differences in the network infrastructure itself as well. Of course, the backhaul needs to be fat enough to feed
indeed.
those, but also the access points. Like that's why there is enterprise grade access points and home grade access points and stuff like that. And this is kind of where we start to separate the the women from the girls or men from the boys.
Amateurs from the pros.
Yeah, amateurs from the pros.
Be careful with your analogies these days.
I hear you. But this is the Super Bowl of Wi-Fi design, and the Super Bowl of the Wi-Fi enterprise vendors as well are these Mobile World Congresses, stadiums, NFL stadiums, and all of that. That's the hardest part. It's incredibly difficult to make them work well.
I was going to say even more Congress, even harder than a stadium, because the stadium, we know we're going to get 60,000 people. That's the amount.
And they're all in seats, so you know where they are.
Fira, people there might be a peak where it gets to 10,000 and then drops to 2,000 because people just move around all the time.
Yeah.
So that must be constant.
There's absolutely that. And there's one major caveat on each category. At Fira, there's actually two at Fira, which makes it harder, which is all the booths will also have their own Wi-Fi, and they eat up the frequency like mofo. How much clean space does that leave to the organizer
when
network?
You pull up your Wi-Fi settings, the list is
just a mess, isn't it?
A problem, I guess, in lots of areas, because whenever you walk through central London and you go to your phone, and if you're trying to get on a Wi-Fi network for some reason in a cafe, there's, like you say, there's dozens of options, and it sounds like it's I don't know. I mean, could your technology help with that? It just sounds like there's this clash of competing systems. It's not very efficient.
Yeah, we do that day in, day out. So one way to find out is we would just walk around your floor for 3 minutes with our measurement tool, and it tells you not only your own network and its coverage, it tells the coverage of every other network and how every other network is interfering with yours and how your own network is interfering with itself as well. Because if you put too many of your own access points, they end up on being on the same channels, and then
they don't complement each other.
Exactly. And the other thing I want to quickly mention about this is mobile hotspots. If you have a mobile hotspot on your phone, you multiply those mobile hotspots, which are essentially Wi-Fi access points, by 100,000 people.
I use my hotspot all the time precisely because I normally find the public Wi-Fi so shite.
You're the problem.
I'm part of the problem.
Also, you created a solution, but it made the problem bigger at the same time.
I'll just kick the can down the road.
Yeah, exactly right.
I want to, before we move on to other stuff, and I'll give Ian you an opportunity to ask any last stuff that you want. I just wanted to. I refer back to Dean sending me some questions, and a couple of ones that he suggested that we haven't explicitly covered, I don't think. Mm-hmm. So I just want to ask them quickly. One of the things he said is, why don't you ask about to what extent telcos get it with enterprise, enterprise in general, but obviously enterprise connectivity. In terms of, you just said that your client base tends to be more SIs or that sort of thing. And I just wonder, we hear lots of talk about enterprise telecoms, and it will come up again in a minute when we talk about Ericsson, because they've been banging that drum for a long time. But I wonder to what extent operators are good at selling directly into enterprise, or whether they're at risk of the enterprise opportunity as and when it does come, being the value mainly being extracted by SIs or hyperscalers or whatever. So have you got any thoughts on operators in the enterprise space and how good a job they're doing?
Oh, absolutely. And like plenty of operators are our customers. You think of 5 big operators, they are our customers in the US and UK Nordics. But so I think operators are pretty siloed in terms of public 5G and their Wi-Fi arm. But people don't know. But operators have huge Wi-Fi services. Most of the stadiums in your neck of the woods in this country are actually designed, deployed, operated by the operators. Well, that's kind of obvious because it's like semi-public. Yeah, exactly. But if you look at, let's take my home country, Finland. Elisa, the kind of one of the 2 really big telecom operators, they're also the biggest Wi-Fi MSP in Finland and enterprise networking MSP in Finland. They're the biggest Cisco reseller in Finland.
Right.
So they are actually surprisingly big. You only see them through through their 5G advertising, but they're big with. Many of them get it extremely well. For example, in Finland, like a lot of the top talent in Wi-Fi in Finland works for operators like Elisa, Telia,
At least it's interesting because their levels of sort of mobile usage per customer in terms of how many gigabytes people are consuming per month is like ridiculous. It's like on a this gets to the whole William Webb thing about sort of network traffic
whether
trends.
or not that's
It's like
plateauing.
there's one argument that if it's that high in Finland and it isn't that high in the UK, aren't
We'll
other
eventually
countries
get
going
there.
to catch up with it? I think William's argument is that countries have their own levels, but it's interesting that they're big in Wi-Fi as well as having this. They're on they're using sort of 34 gigabytes a month or something, whatever it is, on an average basis.
And there's there is a cost element to it. Like we have absolutely unlimited data. It's a triopoly. What is it called? Oligopoly. Like three operators.
There isn't a satisfactory word for three.
Yeah.
It should be triopoly.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Massive competition between the three operators. Hyper competitive market for 25 euros a month. You get absolutely if you negotiate, you get absolutely unlimited high quality data.
Right.
5G.
That European race to the bottom on price.
Yes.
That they don't have in the States.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Do you see? I mean, I don't know if you got more, Dean.
I'll ask one more quick one.
Okay.
That was just to do with indoors. I mean, we kind of touched on it once or twice, but like in this office, in fact, this might be an opportunity for you to mention that cool tool that you brought in and showed us if you want. But in this office, the cellular signal just doesn't penetrate it. It's one of these modern offices that's mainly glass, and it's quite reflective. And one of the reasons to have glass, other than for it to be all a great big shiny corporate status symbol, is presumably for heat efficiency, and that sort of thing. Although actually it sort of works the wrong way in England. We kind of want whatever heat there is outside to get into the building here. It's not like having an office in San Diego or something like that. But anyway, but also the glass is very reflective of other electromagnetic radiation, including radio. And that just doesn't seem to be fixed. Presumably the fix is to have some kind of device inside the building.
Yeah.
But can you just very quickly talk about the general situation when it comes to we've talked about Wi-Fi a lot, so I guess I'm thinking more cellular here. Helping cellular to cross that barrier from outside the building into the building, how that's developing, because it doesn't seem to be developing very much to me.
Yeah. A lot of the buildings are deployed in as well. So there is inside like DAS systems and distributed antenna systems and all of that kind of stuff. So that does happen a lot. But as Dean Bubley, we mentioned him a few times already, Finland has been traditionally a bit different where maybe because of the Nokia legacy or whatever, Dean makes a good impression of a Finnish engineer on the Finnish cellular deployment methodologies. He says that, yes, it's often actually indoors, sometimes out to in, but in Finland, the Nokia engineers go, how does it go again? Outside in always wins. So we do a lot of that. Although we have pretty good.
Is that his Finnish impression?
Yeah, that's his Finnish. Outside in.
God, I wouldn't know where to start doing a Finnish impression.
No, I wouldn't attempt a Finnish impression.
Just watch a couple of
giving it a go.
Rally or Formula One championships, and you'll get them.
Right.
The race was pretty good, but the road was fairly slippery. So overall,
it's quite a flat delivery, is it?
It is a very flat and depressed delivery of.
That's like you're doing like a self-parody now.
Yeah, sorry.
It's interesting the accent the way you do it. When you
am.
think of Finland's geography and history, some of your intonation there sounded almost Russian, which makes sense because you've got a massive border with Russia, and they took it over for a while, didn't they?
Yeah, they did, and
ago.
Sweden did too, and we are a bilingual country, so Swedish is our language.
Finns speak Swedish as well, do they?
I didn't say that. It's just there's a certain amount of population who are Swedish first.
I see.
For example.
I didn't know that either.
And it used to be when I was a kid 800 years ago. Swedish was still mandatory in high school.
Yeah, but the languages are very different, aren't they? There's not really
they're
commonality.
absolutely.
Well, I was thinking when you
Swedish,
was doing
Danish, and Norwegian are all pretty similar, aren't they?
And Icelandic too.
Yeah.
Well, to an ignoramus like me, like the sort of flat delivery that Jussi was just characterising, isn't how Swedish comes over to me. Swedish comes over as a lot more bouncy up and down.
Yes, we are going to Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Las
almost
Vegas.
getting towards Italian in terms of how bouncy it is.
But yeah.
Whereas Russian's a bit flatter, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like Hungarian. So my wife's Slovakian, but there's loads of Hungarians in Slovakia, obviously, and they were in control of Slovakia for about 1,000 years.
Yeah.
And the language is just completely different.
It
In
is.
fact, I think Hungarian's probably, I think we were talking about this before, but it's more closely related to Finnish, isn't it?
Yeah, that's
Any
very.
other European
Yeah,
language.
it's fascinating, the
But
movement of people around that part of the world.
Hungarian, Finnish and Basque, apparently, are part of the same language group.
Yeah,
So,
bizarre.
Yeah.
I thought it was just Spanish.
No.
I'm thinking of
Has it
going
got
there.
anything in common with Spanish at all? And everybody goes, how the hell did the Basques end up there
Yeah.
speaking the way they do when their language is more in common with
They have
Hungarian and
K's for
Finnish?
starters,
Yeah.
which the Spanish don't.
So,
X's. And, yeah.
so what happened? Like, okay, so people were maybe migrating from the Ural Mountains to Hungary, and then
Yeah.
how
Some
did
of them
they-
went up there. some
How,
of them
how
went-
did they figure out? Like, in Hungary, they were like, I wish the weather was significantly shittier and it was like colder and darker. Like, I could we have a little bit of that? And then those guys, went up. They're like, how was that decision made?
I don't know. Some of the ones looking for sun went down to the Basque
Actually,
region.
they didn't want to go there.
Yeah.
They were forced.
Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah, they were driven there.
Here we are. I just did. You know how, like in Google searches now, we get this Gemini answer at the top, which has created all sorts of complications for media when it comes to search engine optimization and stuff like that. And so I said, why? I mean, it auto finished. It auto completed, so that's why it's ungrammatic. It auto completed to why is Finnish and Hungarian related? And it goes, Finnish and Hungarian are considered to be related languages because they both belong to the same language family called Uralic, Urals, I guess. Meaning they share a common linguistic ancestor, despite not being mutually intelligible today due to their separate evolutionary paths. This is all AI saying this
It's not really helpful.
over thousands of years. This shared, and it doesn't like full stops. It uses semicolons instead. I need to sort that out. This shared ancestry manifests in similarities in grammar and word structure, even if the vocabulary that didn't tell us that much. I've just wasted everyone's time there. Sorry.
No, no worries.
But we got that already from.
I know. I apologise, but I thought I'd give AI a go, and it was all right. But I think you need a bit of a deeper dive to know what's going on there. But anyway, we digress. Ian, before we move on to like other news, did you have any other stuff you wanted to ask?
I was only going to ask one broad question on the private 5G again, because it sounded like you were saying there's a lot of activity in the US with CBRS. But would you sort of put that far ahead in terms of it being used? And I mean, how does Europe sort of stack up on private 5G? And there was a lot of talk in Germany and other countries that sort of tried to release spectrum directly to organisations that weren't telcos a few years ago, and I'm kind of wondering whether it's actually gone anywhere and people are doing anything, or
not as much as we would have hoped. So it is still, even in the US, it definitely didn't penetrate the enterprises as we thought. But there is significant activity, and we are getting more and more customers and more inquiries on that. So it is growing, but the rate is completely different from what we thought it would be. But it's growing. That's my gut feel based on. There is actually a couple of bodies. Maybe we can put them on the show notes. But at least one good website that was
We're not
tracking
that sophisticated.
Okay,
We don't really do show notes.
Yeah, absolutely not. We will definitely not put anything on the show notes.
Other than a bit of sarcastic commentary from me, that's about all
There
you
you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
But no, but tell us now, and we'll try and remember it. What was it? Repeat what you were just talking about to put in the show notes.
So in the show notes, we could put a link to maybe a site that follows the popularity of private 5G. They tried to map out how many deployments globally of private 5G over time. How reliable that is, hard to say. But it was an independent, I think probably even non-profit body that was doing.
And can you remember the name of it in case people want to Google it?
Gosh, I wish I remembered.
Okay, don't worry. That's why you wanted the show notes so you could follow up after.
Yeah.
Okay, well, people are just going to be creative. Maybe Gemini will be a bit more helpful on that one than it was on
Is that what it
linguistic
is?
stuff. Well, Gemini's
is that what the name of your AI is?
Well, that's the Google AI, isn't it?
Is it? Oh yeah,
Yeah,
of course it is. Yeah, I knew that really.
Yeah. You just embarrassed yourself. By the way, before we move on, quick review of non-alcoholic beers, since this will be the last week that I'm doing them. So Heineken wasn't all that. You've got more mixers down there as well.
Heineken is regarded as pretty much okay, though.
Well, this Beck's was a lot better.
Oh, really?
This Beck's Blue,
Oh,
pretty
shut
much.
up. You're
the
just saying
Germans-
that because I bought it for you, and you're being typically ungrateful.
I'm very grateful, mate. But
Germans over
I'm
the-
just being honest about what the situation
Do
is.
I have
over the
another
Dutch?
slug of gin?
Yeah,
Oh,
the
yes,
Germans
sir.
are beating the
Yeah.
Dutch on
I mean-
this one. And then I've got this one that Rich
Thank
and
you very
Paul
much.
bought for me last week that I never got around to drinking, which is Beavertown, which is one of our favourite. We drink a lot on neck oil, don't we, Ian?
We do.
Arguably far too much.
Yes.
And this is called Beavertown Laser Crush, alcohol-free IPA. It's all right, but I think of the three I've tried, this Beck's Blue is the best. It tastes most like actual beer. This Beavertown tastes, it's a bit watery, as you'd expect, and a bit strangely sweet.
I've noticed on the 2 days in January that I've had drinks, once you actually start drinking, you really feel like you want to have a few when you've not had drinks for the rest of January.
I've never...
Because I've already got through about 3 beers.
Well, it's very Moorish. My wife, for example, is very good. If we're going out, she'll have a few drinks. She'll get to the level of piss that she's comfortable with, and then she'll just knock it on the head and just start drinking water or not drinking anything.
Yeah.
Whereas you and I, as we know from bitter experience, you're just like, well, that was nice. I think I'll have more.
Yeah.
And there's never a time where your brain goes, are you sure? Well, perhaps it does, but it gets drowned out by the sort of way.
Yeah, there's this illusion that, the initial high it gets better and better and better with every drink.
There's definitely a peak, isn't there?
Exactly.
After which, I mean, like we went to the pub after the pod. And so there's me and Paul, who hadn't been drinking and weren't drinking in the pub. And there's you and Rich, who weren't. Rich, fair play to him. We normally do about 4 of these Hazy Jane sort of 330ml cans on a 2-hour pod. And Rich did 6 when he just sat there.
And then I had a couple in the pub.
And then they left, and I stayed in the pub with you and our colleague Teresa, who's been on the pod. And we definitely, by the time we called it a day, the gulf between you having had a few drinks and me not had reached that point where...
Was it noticeable?
Well...
Oh dear.
But you didn't do anything wrong. It's just that you just start to diverge in terms of your mode of communication, your attention span.
Different realms.
It's much more. The more pissed you get, the more stream of conscious it is.
Yeah.
And people tend to interrupt more. And I think when you're pissed yourself, you just go with the flow. Whereas when you're sober, you're like, I hadn't finished actually. So I think we got to that point by about 8 by about 8, where I was like, I think we've now parted company. But you didn't do anything wrong. It's just an observation of the difference between being pissed and sober. I mean, people who are permanently teetotal, I guess
thought
they
I was charming company.
You were lovely, mate. But people who are apparently teetotal, I suppose, just build up a tolerance of dealing with pissed people, and they probably just leave earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're teetotal and you're still around at 2 a.m, that's a brave effort. Isn't it?
I think when people are tipsy as opposed to falling over, that's when people are sort of saying "I love you" in your ear roll, and then you want to get out.
Yeah.
Anyway, we digress.
Yeah,
from
I did have
matters.
to peel you off me at one stage. No, I didn't. I'm only joking. Cool. Well, actually, before we move on, you see, as far as your company, your area of interest, any other things coming into this pod that you want to talk about? Is there anything else that you wanted to mention?
Now I'm a terrible salesperson, but you
got Mia here. You get Mia to shout something out. You got a special offer, $9.99.
I think maybe the one thing is Wi-Fi 6E and 7 are a really big deal. If you haven't done any homework on the 6 GHz band, I would highly recommend that, and notice that it's different from US to EU. It's different from indoor to outdoor regulation-wise in both of those. So it's a bit messy, but indoors it's amazingly good. The other thing is that whenever you see bad Wi-Fi, it's like people point at the logo on the box. It's not that. It's just that it's badly designed Wi-Fi. That's 9 times out of 10 the problem.
But whose fault is it that it's badly designed? You mean in terms of the layout and all that?
Yeah. They didn't think of where to place the radios, how to configure them. About the capacity things, high capacity things.
So you're talking about design in more of a sort of how it exists in the environment rather than the design of the router.
Exactly right. Exactly right. It's this
the
design.
architecture of the site.
And it's often these are not bad people, but they lack often like people use random guesses, or they're like, I know where to place this. I have this stuff at my home, but it's a little bit of experience or knowledge, but tools. tools for
your
designing.
Technology, I know it's never going to get used for this,
Yeah.
but in theory, could it come into the flat that I'm in and figure out where I should put my repeaters?
Yeah, well, it does it already, but
Right,
but
okay.
I mean it's a pretty expensive proposal.
Yeah,
for,
I mean, I
you're not
doing
going to
it.
spend 390 euros for figuring out your home Wi-Fi. So.
And I think there are. I think I've spoken to people at trade shows before who offer something not dissimilar on a more domestic level.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But it always comes up to the point of cliche that bad Wi-Fi is a massive customer service pain point for operators.
Yep.
And yet they still don't seem to do an amazing job of optimizing that at the moment of you signing the broadband deal. They'd probably save themselves a lot of hassle. Maybe it's too expensive to send an engineer around and do a bespoke job, but
Maybe they rely on the population like me to just figure it out themselves and be like.
Well, they probably do.
But for everyone like you or even like us, where because of our day job we understand it a bit better, you'll have 10 people who haven't got a fucking clue, and they just ring up and go, "My internet's busted," and they just want them to fix it, and they've got no idea why.
I mean, one thing having you on has made me realise is how dependent we all are, because everybody says we're dependent on broadband and obviously these days and internet access, but very specifically Wi-Fi. It's like when we had some connectivity problems to do with the repeaters, and it's like because all the TV we watch these days pretty much is streamed rather than delivered by broadcast.
Exactly.
It takes the TV down if you can't have it in one room that's at the opposite end of the flat to where the actual main router is.
Exactly. And think about if you took out all Wi-Fi and you threw in 4 times or 5 times the amount of traffic on the cellular network, it would instantly collapse like all the cellular networks. So it does play a pretty big role.
Yeah, I feel like all houses and accommodation in the UK are long and thin kind of shape.
I mean, I was
in the US,
certainly
like
in
square.
big cities. Yeah.
That's true.
And we're a relatively cold country, so we tend to have quite thick insulated walls. So that's a thing as well.
Yeah. There just isn't Wi-Fi is an essential part of our lives, but there isn't any knowledge about Wi-Fi. Nobody has any knowledge. Maybe if at school there was I don't know 8 hours of basics of Wi-Fi.
Do that in physics.
Yeah, how much productivity?
Banging on about atoms and stuff.
Exactly. How
Teach
much
us something useful.
would that gain?
It's thick, badly insulated walls, I think.
Well, yes, we have
It's like being in a First World War trench.
No, but we have bricks where the US is thin plywood kind of stuff.
It's just,
so it doesn't penetrate as much. Yeah.
There's so many drafty properties around, I think.
Ian's got a sort of
including mine.
House moan tangent coming up. Well, we're trying going to nip in the bud. Let's say we've teased it a couple of times. Let's talk about Ericsson because they just had their quarterlies. What was my take on it? I see I've already forgotten what I wrote. Oh, yeah. So my headline was cautious.
You only wrote it today.
I know. Well, it's a combination of having lots of stuff flying around in my head and senility. Yeah. Well, perhaps alcohol sort of helps with that sort of thing. It sort of loosens you up. Anyway.
I don't think it does.
My headline was cautious optimism from Ericsson on the back of, quote, strong Q4 numbers. And the strong was just a quote from Boya Ekholm's commentary. 10%. Their shares are down 10% because I think, according to a Reuters piece I saw, profits were expected to be higher, so it was a profit miss.
I don't think that's the only reason the shares are down 10%.
Okay, go ahead, take it.
Forecast?
I mean, I don't think shares would be down 10% just because they missed their profit expectations. And by the way, the profits are really good. I mean, one thing that you take out of those results today, I think
their margins
top line
are
revenues
all
are up 1% reported, 2% organic. Whereas you look at the net income's up more than 40%. Gross margins, operating margins,
the margins are
up a lot.
solid.
Lots of job cuts. I think 9,400, including external contractors last year.
That was over the course of all of last year. I mean, that's a lot. What you've probably written what percentage of their total headcount that is.
Well, I put the figures in for total headcount, I think, and how they compare now with what they were when Ekholm took over. I mean, it's down from about 111,000 when he was coming in to sort of 93, 94 at the moment.
Right, so that's about a 10% over the last year cut.
And you've got to remember as well that that includes their acquisition of Vonage, which brought a couple of thousand at least people into the business, I think. So, and and smaller acquisitions to do with private 5G. I can't remember the name of the company now off the top of my head.
Cradlepoint, yeah. Did they separate the numbers between or of the private 5G?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, so to cover that off quickly, Global Communications Platform, which is the Vonage bit of enterprise wireless, didn't do very well at all, quite badly down. And I think the rest of it, which I think is probably Cradlepoint, was up marginally. It wasn't a huge increase, but it was up a bit.
However, Cradlepoint, if you look at their business, it's not just private 5G. It's a lot of these mobile like 5G backboned routers and things like that they use in fire trucks and stuff like that. That's public 5G connected. So you shouldn't confuse, I think, Cradlepoint's revenue with Ericsson's private 5G revenue for two reasons. Cradlepoint has a lot of other stuff, and Ericsson has historically had two private 5G systems now since Cradlepoint acquisition. They have the Ericsson Dot, their traditional private 5G, which is based on their public 5G networks, and now Cradlepoint, which is more like, I guess, the focus now with them.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there wasn't, in the call I was in, there wasn't a huge amount of tension on enterprise wireless, not as much as there has been, I think, in the past. But I mean, to go back to the 10% drop, I think it was partly missing an earnings expectation, even though actually profits were up a lot. And it wasn't just to do, by the way, with cost cutting. That was partly, they call it the mix shift, don't they? So basically what's happened in the last year is a lot of work has gone from India, which had this like very rapid 5G rollout that took place over almost seemed a few months to sort of build out 5G across the whole country, or a lot of it. That's really slowed down, and a lot of the work recently has been in the US market with a win against Nokia in the AT&T network, and a pickup there after some inventory sort of adjustments that have happened. That's like the growing market, and that work tends to be a lot more profitable than what they were doing in India with people like Bharti and Reliance. That's kind of low margin work. It's always been recognised that way. I think there's a suspicion that people pay higher prices for the same equipment in North America, and it's more software based, and so it's partly to do with that. It's partly to do with job cuts. It's partly to do with some supply chain stuff they've been doing. But I think the reason that it's the 10% is there was just some quite bleak sort of outlook, basically. I don't know if you saw the Del Oro thing that came out either today or yesterday as well.
Andrew's writing up for us as we speak. And they're basically saying no growth for the next 5 years.
Yeah, Stefan Pongratz, who's the main analyst at Del Oro, who I sort of looked at his LinkedIn stuff that I got hold of, and Ericsson had Del Oro's forecast in its report, and it's 0% to 2% growth. So you look at that in the context of 2023 and 2024, that's a lot better because it was down in double-digit percentage since 2023 and 2024. So that's good. Okay, it's flattened out. But then if anybody's thinking maybe that flattening out is the signs of it starting to go up afterwards, Del Oro's forecasting 0% compound annual growth rate over a 5-year period.
Yeah, so I got a couple of thoughts about that.
I think some of the 10% drops to do with that, really.
Yeah, but the only thing, I'm certainly not contradicting you. I'm just giving some additional thoughts. One, did you chat to Frederick Yedling as well? Yeah. One of the things when I chatted to him is he said that they are provisionally going for the upper end. They're going for 2% for this year. Right. Their outlook is for 2% global RAN market growth.
Yeah.
And it could be that within Del Oro's 0% over 5 years, there's some peaks and troughs.
Yeah, but it's not even rate of inflation, is it?
Well, quite. But then one thing I thought about, where did I get it from? God, I can't remember. But I think the rate of global RAN market growth has been pretty fucking low for quite a while.
Yeah, so we've got Omdia and Del Oro, the two main analyst firms that do that. If you go back to 2022, it was about 45 billion, the RAN market, product revenues. 2023, it went down to 40 billion.
Yeah.
Last year, we don't have the numbers yet because they're still sort of processing it, but the expectation was it would be down to 35 billion at the midpoint of Omdia expectations.
But
so
what was it like?
At a $10 billion annual revenue drop in the space of 2 years.
Yeah, okay, that's a big
So
deal.
a flattening out is obviously quite good, but then a flattening out that just leads to stagnation for 5 years isn't so good.
But the only point I'm trying to make is it's been flat for quite a while. So this...
It's been down for quite a while.
No, but I'm like, say, a decade ago.
Right.
I don't think... Oh God, I'm trying to remember it now. This definitely came up when I was researching the piece when I wrote it. And apparently it didn't even grow that much during the 4G period.
Oh, I mean, the 4G, the cellular market as a whole it's not like it's going to go from being worth 30 billion to being worth 70 billion. You know? It's only ever going to go like that, like a waveform.
Yeah, and a fairly flat one. But so there's all that going on.
But I think there was an expectation that 5G maybe would produce more growth than we're seeing.
Yes.
And one of the messages that came out of, which I think I'll end my story with Ecom on the earnings call this morning, was this sort of sense of frustration that 5G still... He actually said it. He says 5G's not been built out at all. There's no 5G. You know, I mean, they're obviously going to say that because they want operators to go and build lots of 5G networks. But they were saying that if you look at the coverage levels, they're really low. And he brought London into this as an example. There's hardly any 5G, he was saying. I mean, it's not... He said when you get a 5G symbol on your phone and you're in London, you're probably on dynamic spectrum sharing, where you're using some 4G spectrum to get 5G coverage. You're not really on like the sweet spot of mid-band 5G and proper
not
equipment.
Proper pure.
So I think the market reaction was partly to do with the outlook. And the problem is they don't really have a growth story.
No.
So they don't have... they're still trying to push this idea of network APIs as a Aduna, I think they've called it now, haven't they? This offshoot, this joint venture they've got with 12 telcos.
That
came out
largely
of Vonage partly.
run by Ericsson.
The idea is that you use APIs to expose supposedly valuable features of the 5G network
that
to
people can then
application developers, and they can innovate on top of that, and that will sort of open up new telco revenues from extra usage and also from some payments for the APIs themselves. And then the telcos, because they're making more money, will be in a better position to actually spend money on new equipment. But there's a lot of dots to join to get to that point. Yeah.
Still a leap of faith, isn't it?
There's still a leap of faith, and we don't. I think if you look at Omdia's stats these days on the outlook for that whole network APIs thing over the next few years, again, it's not bad, but it's not tons of money. It's not like Nvidia, yeah. So it's a few percentage points of growth rather than what 5G was maybe cooked up to be a few years ago. So they don't have this super growth story from the business that they're in. And he was I haven't written this story yet, by the way. This is my follow on that I plan to do on Monday. But he was very downbeat about 6G. I was surprised to hear.
I had a bit of chat about that. What did I get? I mean, I asked him. 6G sort of came up indirectly from me asking him a question. Given that their margins are better and their cash flow situation's better and their net cash from a year ago has really shot up, so they've got a lot more.
Do you know why
their net kroner in the bank?
Do you know why their net cash position's so good?
I don't.
Do you know why they want to have a net cash position that's so good?
Why don't you answer that one as well? So
the reason they want to have such a good... Because that question got asked, why does Ericsson have to have such a good net cash position as opposed to doing something with that money, is one of the main reasons is that when they were... If you go back to 2016, when Hans Vestberg was there, and everybody was saying Ericsson could go out of business, they might get sold to Cisco and everything. Apparently customers were saying, we don't want to invest with you because we're not sure you're going to be around in a few years' time.
So it's like a buffer.
Very, very interesting in the context of companies like Mavenir these days.
Yeah.
I thought there was a...
That's true. You don't want people shitting themselves that you're going to go out of business.
He was thinking, what I want analysts to take away from this and think about is all these smaller little open RAN players that are supposedly kind of going to do great things in the future. Are they going to be around in the next few years? Because you don't want to... He said, when you buy from us, you're locked in for 10 years. He pretty much said that. He didn't say locked in.
Yeah.
But you make a commitment over a 10-year period to be with that vendor. And if you're going to be with a vendor for 10 years, you want to make sure that vendor is going to be around for 10 years.
It's like people who bought that last Saab Why would you buy the last Saab? What if you have an issue?
Totally.
Who do you go to fix it?
So who you want to be with? You want to be with Ericsson.
I didn't even know they'd gone out of business.
And if you can use it and you don't worry about it, Huawei. Really?
Yeah.
Let's be honest. And Samsung, actually, because
you're
they're big enough to...
So you're saying, and I'm certainly not being sceptical because I don't know enough about how these things work to have an opinion on it myself, but you're saying that having a strong net cash position is a defence against hostile M&A.
They were saying it as a kind of survival thing. Like people are confident in your future if you've got a strong net cap.
I suppose,
position.
broader than hostile M&A, you can just say, look, we're all right. We've got enough stashed away for a rainy day, so don't worry about it. Just buy our stuff and stop fucking moaning.
And it ensures that they can carry on investing in R&D at a high level.
So that's interesting. So I, not knowing any of that, I just went, are you going to spend any of that cash on R&D then? That was my question. And his, you know how even by Swedish standards, Fredrik Jedling's quite measured in his responses.
So Fredrik Jedling, for people who don't know,
he's the head of networks there, effectively a number 2 at Ericsson.
2 or 3 after the CFO, I suppose.
Maybe.
Yeah.
And Eric Kudden.
And he does his round of media interviews, I think, every time.
He does that. He used to be a CFO back in the day, and he stepped into the spot.
Well, I think it's more appropriate for us to speak to him rather than the CFO, really.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. And now he's started doing it on Teams, so we get to see him sat in his office in Kista. Is that it?
Kista, I think, is the...
Kista. Thank you.
Close to Stockholm.
Sorry, were you going to say something?
Yeah. Like so on these kind of flattened things and all of that, I'm sure you've discussed this a million times in the podcast, but is it related to like, what was the substance of 5G truly? What substance have we seen? Substantial improvement for the consumers.
Well, that's the problem.
And what's the promise of 6G? Like, what's the substantial...
Totally.
What 5G
there isn't one. I mean,
exactly. Yeah, what have we seen since 4G? That's super substantial.
We have spoken about it, but it's still a very relevant.
But I think
a
lot of it was a lot of the stuff to do with things like IoT and. I mean, not necessarily private 5G specifically, but certainly like new use cases that go beyond smartphones were talked up a lot, and we've not really seen any of that. And maybe that could happen. But I thought the interesting thing was him, Echo, that is, really downplaying the sort of... I mean, that's the first... I almost wrote this today rather than just a results write-up, but I couldn't get my brain around it quickly enough, so I thought I'll leave it till Monday. But he made some really pointed comments about 6G as not a new... He said it's really breaking the paradigm that we saw with going from 2G to 3G, from 3G to 4G to 5G. This is not a big game-changing technology. It's an evolution. Mm-hmm. What you really want to ensure is that by the time you're at the end of the 5G stage, when you're talking about going to 6G, that you've re-architected your networks to be... I mean, they're like this expression programmable, don't they?
Yeah.
And all that stuff. And then 6G is really just... kind of a slight adjustment on top of that almost. And I thought that was really interesting that a guy is running a company that has always made money from new generations.
Fair play to him for being honest. I mean, you can only bury your head in the sand for so long, can't you?
Absolutely. And it's funny how similar like Wi-Fi is to 5G in that sense. Like Wi-Fi 6 without E. If we talk about the shift from Wi-Fi 5 to 6, there wasn't too much new there. Like with Wi-Fi, there's also these like almost irrelevant numbers. But then the 6E was humongous, and now again 7 marketing-wise is big because it's a new number, but substance-wise it's a lot smaller than
E
6
was the
to
big
6E.
jump.
E was the big chunk because of 6 gigahertz. So it's similar to cellular, and in cellular too, I think like extra spectrum would be something, or maybe millimeter wave. It held promise, but
you know what I still wonder, Jussi, about the extra spectrum is, cellular download speeds are good enough.
That's true. That's true.
4G.
We don't need that.
And so it's often talked up as a big deal, and we need more mid-band and all this sort of thing. And then we'll have Boya moaning that we're a bit shit at it in Europe, especially in.
But that's why the telcos haven't spent, obviously.
But I just wonder where the demand is for this extra bandwidth.
Yeah, that's.
Well, there isn't. That's the problem.
Yeah, Wi-Fi there was.
The worst is when the provider doesn't, like, you would do a speed test on a train platform in London, and it would be like 700 megabytes, whatever.
Yeah.
And you go to download a podcast, and it still takes 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Because Spotify doesn't have that.
I see that like Edge.
I'm like, I just did a speed test. It said 700. Now I'm going to download a podcast, which is about 700 meg, And why is it taking
But they're
3
rate
minutes?
limiting. They're rate limiting. Maybe
Yeah.
it's a clog on the Spotify end of things.
So I'm like, oh, what's
Yeah.
I mean, the big problem for Ericsson really, and Nokia and Huawei actually, is us guys not spending more on our mobile subscriptions each month.
Yep.
You know, because exactly what you've said. If someone's sitting there at a train station thinking, I really want to download this Joe Rogan podcast quickly, or a movie. And I feel I'm willing to pay my telco more to do that. If people wanted to do that and it was monetizable and the telcos were making more money, then the telcos would then spend more money on 5G equipment. For sure they would. Yeah, then they'd see a need to roll out some of this equipment.
I can plug my...
But they don't.
The demand isn't there.
The sketches
not there.
Yeah.
It's good enough to do what you need to do. And
5G man, the sketches I made, that was the first sketch.
And I think
Downloading a movie quickly and his nemesis was fiber, so technically Wi-Fi.
Yeah, this is true. This is true. I think was it 5G or 6G? Maybe both have kind of promised improvements in indoor location tracking. So if only somebody could.
Like the radar sort of thing.
Yeah, like GPS works fantastic.
There's a lot of
outdoors.
sensor stuff with 6G that gets talked up.
Digital likes to talk that up.
Because that could
museum
be
experience where I can see you in front of this painting.
Yeah,
but
or us just trying
would you
to
like
find
to buy it?
Like a meeting room or the next meeting, because we're both clueless with directions with me. And I wish there was just.
Speak for yourself.
Like a shopping mall. Shopping mall.
Yeah, I'd be lost without my phone.
Yeah. Same here. But GPS only works outdoors, right?
Yeah.
The second you go indoors, it's kind of any mapping application is lost.
Yeah, but I thought it was interesting given the stuff about sensors with 6G, which I think if you listen to all the different ways that people talk to you about 6G, sounds like the one that's maybe the most different potentially from a consumer perspective, that Ekholm was like, he's still feeling that. I mean, it doesn't sound like he feels that's a big opportunity, because it's not like he's presenting this as anything different. I think he used the word evolution in the.
And I got that, and I'm gonna have to wrap up this segment soon because we're running out of time. We've got one more we want to talk about.
Right.
I got that from Frederick Yedling.
Right.
When I asked him about the R&D spend, he sort of moved that on, unbidden onto this, and we know that we've said it before. Him and Ekholm, their message are very closely aligned when you have these things.
I suspect that's orchestrated.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's not organic. But yes, he quoted and said it'll be a stable and gradual evolution. And so what they're really doing is for whatever reason, they're going, I mean, I said, this is me characterizing it, rather than another once in a decade upgrade CapEx frenzy. And so, yes, their message is definitely that's not happening. Just one last thing on Ericsson. I mean, some positives I took from it, which overlaps with some of what you've said and written. They at least seem to have, to use a slightly annoying term, sort of right-sized themselves for the current market environment. So they're able to make a profit.
They're looking in a good position.
They're looking in a good position. Yeah. Obviously smaller than they were a decade ago.
And they're not substantially smaller, by the way. They've gone down from 111,000 to 93 or 94,000.
I don't know what their comparative revenues are adjusted for inflation and that sort of thing. But yeah, so they're in a decent position there. But so as a company, I think they're fine. And one thing I'll say about the share price, by the way,
because they're pretty much the only 5G option outside China. Them and Nokia, aren't they? So
Indeed.
we don't have anybody else.
Indeed. At risk of mentioning Open RAN, which I won't because we don't have time. But one thing I'll say, while their share price dropped off by, on the
Was it bounced back?
Stockholm. No, this is me using a different scale. No, it's down 11% in Stockholm today on the news. But I will say that over the course of 5 years, they'd actually had a real climb for the last year.
Well, I suspect that dip
that little dip
there was all around about the time of the Iraq revelations.
Yeah, so there's a strong, steady decline from 21 down to the end of 23, but then it's been on a nice climb from the end of 23 until now.
Later than the Iraq.
So,
maybe
as I said in my piece, although I was reading it back to myself on the train, and I need to slightly correct that. But basically, they're near 3-year highs, even accounting for that drop.
I wonder how they compare now to when Ekholm took over, because that's what people often do, isn't it? When a CEO leaves, it goes, the share price higher now than when he joined. I suspect it isn't. I bet it's
probably
the same.
not.
I bet it's at the same level.
They kind of took down Nokia with them too today, actually.
When did that come?
There you are. It's at the same level, more or less.
When
2017, end of 2017.
Right.
Oh, it's higher.
So we're looking at Google Finance for well, no one can see what we're doing.
No, it's higher.
But they're doing right. Basically, the point is their share price is on an upward crest, and today's sell-off of about 10% has only eaten a little bit into that.
Yeah.
But you can see what they said. The next 5 years for RAN will be flat.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they took down Nokia with them today as well.
Oh right.
Yeah.
The day.
Well, so exactly that proves it's not just about an earnings miss. Yeah. It's the Deloro forecast as much as it is the.
If you look at the week graph.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
So I'm looking at Nokia. Shall I look at them in Helsinki?
It's outlook.
So they're down 4.5% today, and they haven't done.
It's not an earnings miss.
Yeah. All right. So moving on quickly, our final segment, we're going to talk about Stargate. And Stargate, until now, most people thought of it as that. What was it? A 90s film?
It was 1994.
There we are.
It was a shitty film with James Spader.
Kurt Russell, how dare you?
And Kurt Russell.
It's not a bad film.
I thought when you intervened then, you were going to say it wasn't 1994.
No, he's saying it's not shit.
Yeah. What's the name of the other guy, the scientist?
James Spader.
James
the
Spader.
scientist. Kurt Russell's the military
Yeah.
guy. They basically find they find a wormhole that James Spader figures out by putting some
I
Egyptian
through to
hieroglyphs
describe the
together.
Trump thing.
Yeah, well,
Trump has found a wormhole.
There's a parallel with the Trump thing.
Oh.
And they go through this wormhole to this other planet and encounter this super intelligence that has basically enslaved humans.
Yeah.
That it's taken over from.
And it's all a
the
bit
days of
ancient Egypt, isn't it? Yeah.
So what would you name an AI project?
Well, there we are.
About what you would obviously draw on the name of a science fiction film. It's about enslaving humans to a higher intelligence. And that's what they did. They called it Stargate because these people. It's a bit like
feeding into our paranoia.
It's a little bit like when Mark Zuckerberg, a colossal cretin that he is, decided to call.
Steady.
I think that's pretty unanimous, isn't it? I don't think that's a controversial view. But when he decided to call,
he's one of the richest people in the world. He's done something right.
I don't think that changes the assessment of him generally. But I think when he decided to name it the Metaverse, based on a Neil Stephenson book called Snow Crash, which is about a very dystopian future. I don't know why these sort of tech bros seem to draw on fictional science fiction titles that are about really bad outcomes.
Well, I think that's a really good point. And I think one of the reasons they do it is because they're just card-carrying geeks.
On the nose.
And so they don't know how normies perceive these things.
Which in itself is a very worrying thing because it shows a certain...
it does.
Skynet was probably the first choice, and they're like, no, that's too obvious.
But there is a Skynet, isn't there? Is there? BT's got a Skynet or
It wouldn't surprise me
something?
if someone called something Skynet. It really wouldn't. And someone's going to go, because then it's so obvious, someone's going to go, hang on a minute, Skynet? That's like...
Yeah, and they will have only got as far as to say, yeah, because it was such an efficient and effective system. And then we go, yeah, and it fucking killed everyone.
Yeah.
You forgot that bit.
Wayland Industries.
Yeah. Anyway,
someone's going to come up with Wayland with the next one. That's a bit too boring.
We haven't got too much time. Ian, why don't you summarise what Stargate is in this?
I mean, I don't think anybody really
context.
knows what it is exactly, but it's
$500 billion.
It's got lots of big numbers attached to it and lots of big names attached to it. So it's $500 billion investment in AI data centers, OpenAI. AI data centers, I think, was the emphasis.
They're the big AI partner.
The companies, there were certain companies that were named as being the main investors, and then there's a whole bunch of others that are kind of involved in it on a partnership level. And people like Jensen Huang, who's obviously very integral to this.
Ubiquitous these days.
The photo itself that showed the main people involved in it, three of the guys, if you add their combined ages up, it comes to 225. And then there's this other bloke who looks like the grandson who's out with his granddads and their Japanese mate.
So they don't care about the future.
This is the thing, exactly. They don't really care.
So the other people you're referring to Trump, who's 78, Larry Ellison of Oracle,
80.
who's 80, is he?
80.
He's looking right. Although his hair's looking a bit moody at the moment.
Well,
I don't know if
Larry Ellison from Oracle has clearly had substantial amounts of work done.
Yeah.
Quite clearly.
He looks more like Joan Rivers.
He looks like someone from Desperate Housewives.
Yeah.
No, but even like you're talking about the future, even from an environmental point of view, Trump made a point like, oh yeah, they want to plug these into like coal plants would be great. Clean coal, he called it.
Yeah,
you know,
clean
'cause
coal.
I think a big chunk of it was about power solutions as well.
So I want to say a quick thing about the claim, and then I want to ask Ian to talk about the telecoms angle. But the claim, it's typical sort of Trump hyperbole, and I'm not totally hostile to it. I think, it's been there's a couple of things that are interesting about Trump Mark II. One, maybe Europe could learn a little bit more from this American. We were talking, you see, a little bit about this before we were recording. This American go-getting, hyperbolic sort of thing. It often is culturally jarring for us. But then again, at least they've got this reach for the stars, ambitious, stop looking for problems, just fucking get on with it. And I suppose someone like Musk, who is also obviously a very polarizing figure, is a great embodiment of that.
But what you just said, I think it's interesting that it came after this epic session of sort of tearing up signing executive orders and tearing up Biden stuff. There was a Biden AI safety thing about
and he went,
people providing details on large language models, and a lot of people have gone. Apparently, a lot of Europeans have gone, yeah, that's what we should be like. We should be less cautious. And some Americans have gone, well, hang on a minute, maybe, if you're talking about something that's aiming for AI superintelligence, maybe it's not a bad idea to have some safety protections in place. So it's a hard one to sort of come down on either side of it. You can be overly cautious, but you can be...
It's a balance.
Wild West.
It happens. It happens in lots of ways. Sorry, I'll let you talk and say. It happens in lots of ways. Like I brought this up when we were talking on the pod about censorship. It's the tension between safety and freedom.
Yeah,
exactly. You can have total freedom and no safety. You can have total safety and no freedom. And what we're looking for is the sort of ideal somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, and there's a competitive / monetary component. Like, for example, a lot of the AI tools that are available for anyone in the US, like Sora, the AI video generator, Apple's Apple Intelligence, they're not available in Europe because regulation.
Right.
And we're falling behind even on the consumer level devices.
It's available here if you switch your language to US English.
Oh, is that the only hack you have to do?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. You've worked that out.
Is that really so?
The phone tells you.
Have you tried to do it? You've got an iPhone, haven't you?
Yeah.
Have you actually made the magic happen?
AI tells you. It goes change your thing to the US.
Okay, excellent.
I don't know about Europe, since we're not in Europe anymore. But here, that's what you...
Does the AI say,
could be a EU
I want you to turn me on, Pierre?
Yeah. That AI you're about to have a relationship with.
Put your credit card details, please. No, but the Stargate feels like the Manhattan Project a little bit.
Well, it is a little bit. And the only other thing I'll say, so there's all this hyperbole and, and Trump going, it's a beautiful project and all that sort of thing. And they're talking about...
good.
talking about how there's going to be $500 billion invested. And the interesting thing, how Elon Musk is very supposedly in the Trump inner circle this time. Well, he's not part of this, and he obviously got properly butthurt about it.
Well, he said nobody's got enough money for it.
Exactly, he sort of trolled it on his own platform X, and when I think SoftBank's got about 10 bill, OpenAI's got fuck all, or whatever it is that he said.
Do you know the weirdest thing about that announcement for me was Oracle being involved at all? I mean, what's Larry Ellison doing there? He's 80 years old. He looks like someone from Desperate Housewives.
He started banging on about using AI for curing cancer and shit like that.
Oracle's like this old database company to me from the early 2000s.
Well, maybe that's it.
He's desperate. He's
desperate for it to seem more contemporary.
I didn't really get their role in it, to be honest. They're not really an AI company.
They asked Trump about TikTok, and then he threw Larry Ellison under the bus, saying hey, do you want to buy it? And he's like,
and Larry's like, whoa,
I give you a good deal.
I mean, I obviously get Sam Altman, sinister as he is, being there, and
SoftBank
and Masayoshi Son.
Yeah.
I mean, he's been a great.
He likes to chuck a bit of money around.
He likes to chuck a lot of money around, and some of his investments have obviously been brilliant over the last few years.
Some have been shite. I don't think his returns are that amazing.
Was it Andrew Orlovsky at the Telegraph said this is obviously going to fail badly because Masayoshi Son's involved?
A bit harsh, but he might be onto something.
But I wasn't quite sure what Larry Ellison was doing there.
No.
But I mean, it's...
And if they want to make Oracle look a bit more new and contemporary, maybe don't have an 8-year-old geezer who looks like an android. But anyway, the only thing I want to say before I ask you, Ian, to talk about the telecoms angle is... Firstly, I thought it was interesting. This isn't telecoms at all, but it is consequential. it's always been just a matter of time before this Trump-Musk alliance crumbles, because they're both egomaniacs, they're both trolls, they both don't take a backward step, and their interests don't directly overlap in a lot of areas. And this is just one time he's gone and trolled it. I saw on Tech Meme, who is it? Politico. Here's a headline on Politico. While Trump downplayed Elon Musk's Stargate criticism, assuring reporters, quote, they're putting up the money, close quote, key White House sources say they're furious with Musk. So there's just one thing.
That's after 3 days.
Yeah. So it's obviously going to kick off, and then we'll have this unedifying spectacle of them shitting on each other over their social media platforms. But yes, it does seem overhyped, and to the point that we were talking earlier about the tension between one extreme and another. It is worrying when you get real utopians like Altman who just can't see any downside to just going gangbusters and racing. We spoke about it on the pod, racing towards super intelligent AI and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that's that. But Ian, like in the 5 minutes we got left, you sort of you put up a cool screenshot from Stargate the film, but then you said
responsible for that.
But then you said, okay, didn't you? Okay, yeah. I just, as we said before, I just self-publish everything, so I assume. But you said your headline was, which I presume you were responsible for, were you?
Yeah.
What the 500 billion Stargate AI plan could mean for telecom. So why don't you quickly summarise that?
Well, I think there's two. There's the obvious one and the less obvious one. The obvious one is something we've talked about quite a lot, I think, in the last few weeks on the pod and have people on, to do with the need for connectivity within those data centers and between those data centers. Something Nokia's got a massive role in actually at the moment. I think that's mainly probably the big growth opportunity for Nokia at the moment, and certainly with this Infinera acquisition that's going through. Who did we have on? Who's actually from a company building the optical links between data centers?
Oh, yeah, it's Exa
Infrastructure.
Jim who brought us the whiskey.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge opportunity there, I think, in terms of the optical transport infrastructure that needs to go between data centers and the kind of connectivity within it. Whether it's done with, I mean, the InfiniBand's the kind of NVIDIA, option for doing this sort of fabric.
Good name.
But you could have it done, I think increasingly it's moving towards an Ethernet platform that someone like Nokia might do. So I think there's definitely an upside there for, I mean, it's not just Nokia, it's people like Arista and Cisco and that's the obvious kind of telecom story. And then the less obvious one, I think, ties into who's doing the sort of underlying like semiconductor technologies for this. I mean, there's a huge amount of investment now going into obviously GPUs and driven by NVIDIA. And you look at what that means for companies like the foundries, like TSMC, and where it's putting all of its resources. And they're talking about how much of it's now dedicated towards GPUs. There is an argument in the telecom industry that I've heard from various people who didn't want to go on record about it, but were kind of happy to speak anonymously, that telco really needs to find. It's a bit like the virtual RAN days, and it was like we need to piggyback on x86 and go to, find a way of like maybe dedicating our resources to algorithms for radio access network, development, but not worry so much about the hardware side of things. Is there an argument that there's a kind of sea change going on where we're going to a kind of accelerated computing GPU world sort of succeeding those x86s as a kind of general purpose platform for an AI world, and that RAN has to kind of find a way of piggybacking on top of
you're already
this?
Investing all these GPUs for AI, and you might as well use a bit of their capacity for telecoms and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and this is already, even before this announcement, by the way, this was a theme. This idea of AI RAN. NVIDIA trying to make a big pitch about doing GPUs combined, by the way, with an ARM-based CPU as a way of supporting like RAN compute in networks, and it would involve some shifts to be made by Nokia and
I bet we get another
Ericsson,
big NVIDIA announcement.
But they're both working with it. They're both working with it. I mean, this could be a big thing in Barcelona.
Last year, didn't they have some telecoms announcement, but we weren't that blown away by it, NVIDIA. But this year, it's a completely different.
It was coming last year, and this year after a year of momentum, and those companies.
I bet you they'll have a telecoms announcement.
I think that could
February
be a big thing.
Sometime.
So that's maybe the less obvious one, but it's kind of what it means for where the telecom industry goes. RAN's pretty small, like 35 billion maybe last year. We've just been saying it's gone down. It's like, can it?
Jensen Huang doesn't get out of bed for that much.
Can it survive doing its own dedicated hardware, or does it need to sort of piggyback on a bigger ecosystem?
Cool. All right, we're close to wrapping up. Are you going to be at Mobile Congress, you'll see?
We will be, yeah. We'll be at the Business Finland booth. Which hall? I think it's hall 5. Okay. What about you?
Cool. Yeah, well, we're going to be there.
We're just roaming.
Roaming, yeah.
I don't think we're probably Informa probably does have some sort of area, doesn't it?
No, we certainly don't have a booth,
room,
and we don't have one of those like CNN little areas where they look all grown up and important.
So come check out the Business Finland booth. Last year, and I think this year, I don't know if you went there, but they actually have couple of saunas that are meeting rooms. So the meeting rooms
like
can feel like saunas.
Sauna.
Yeah. It's very, very
I always
cool.
get worried that they're going to make me strip off and then jump in a lake, a freezing lake.
That comes later.
When I went to Oulu,
then I get out not looking my best.
When I went to Oulu, I was worried. Is it pronounced Oulu?
Oulu.
Yeah. When I went there, I was worried that Nokia was going to make me do that because I heard stories of people going there being made to sort of do that sort
hazing.
Of thing.
Yeah, rolling in the snow and then jumping in the ice water.
Yeah, less of that. Okay, we better wrap up because Pierre's got stuff to do. And we banged on for close to 2 hours anyway. Doesn't time fly?
It really does.
And I'll just say thanks a lot for that. It was really interesting. It's always interesting to get someone in talking about Wi-Fi because it does get under-discussed, partly because of, as you detailed, it's a little bit messy in terms of it being unlicensed and it's a bit of a free-for-all. So that's great to hear about it from your point of view. And we'll try and make it over to the Finland zone. Can't guarantee
do.
I'll have a sauna.
Please do. We are right there, smack down the middle of Helsinki, so don't be a stranger when you pop by. Finland has an excellent culinary scene, excellent wine scene, excellent beer scene, so I'll take you out.
There's Finnish wines, is there?
No, we're just really good at importing good wines. Actually, our chairman of board is Risto Siilasmaa, who used to be not chairman, but he's on our board. He used to be the chairman of Nokia, and he has a problem of he collects wines, and he has 1,000 bottles of undrunk wine, and they're starting to go bad. So that would be actually Telecoms angle, right? Yeah, exactly right. So.
I reckon we can help with drinking some undrunk. Like vintage wines, don't you?
Scott? Imagine. Oh, that one.
Once you get through your dry January.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? God. Okay, well, cool. We better stop there. Thanks a lot for coming. It's great to meet you.
Thank you so much.
And Mia. And if you've got time, please join us for a drink after.
Oh, will do. Right. Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Okay, thanks a lot for listening. Make sure you join us for the next one.